Hello, my Flannel Church history peoples. Welcome back. Hope you can join, if not now, later. The hope of this class, along with others, to continue to help us understand how we got where we are, some of the different doctrines and their development, and the history of God's work in the world of um, bringing the gospel and the establishment of the church, how that all took place. And so we are right in the middle of this. The plan is to go about 49 sessions, and this is number 24. I decided to add an extra one today. I was going to try to do one on the Reformation and kind of the rest of Europe, including England and Scotland, but got to be too much. And so next week I'll do England and Scotland. It has its own chapter in what we're using as our textbook, 2,000 Years of Christ Power. And so we'll do that next week, which will add a week overall. So this week we're going to do, how did the Reformation spread beyond Germany and Switzerland to the rest of Europe? I'm not going to be doing Eastern Europe, Poland, and so on, mostly just Western Europe. So that's where we are. As always, if you're on live and you'd like to ask any questions, you can do it in a comment. I have my phone sitting here. You can text or afterwards. Happy to have any of you ask anything or comments. So we began this section several weeks ago with the pre-Reformation, Wycliffe in England, and then on the continent, Huss, and then the humanist movement within the Roman Catholic Church with men like Erasmus. That then led to the eruption of the Reformation in Germany with Luther in the early 16th century. And from there, it spread not only to Switzerland, but to the rest of Europe in the 16th and into the early 17th century. So today, how did it spread? That's what we're going to talk about. Most of it spread from Lutheran influenced missionaries, evangelists going from Lutheran Germany or from the Reformed in Switzerland, particularly Geneva, with their training institute that sent pastors and evangelists to other parts of Europe. So it obviously, as the Reformation picked up, things are being printed, disseminated, translated all to English. It was inevitable that this Reformation fervor would spread to the rest of Europe. And so it was. So where we're going to go this week on the rest of Europe, part one, and part two will be next week's, focusing specifically on England and Scotland, because that's where most of us are from, and it might be helpful to you to focus just on that. Then 2 weeks from now, we'll look at the Counter-Reformation with the Roman Catholic Church and the Council of Trent, and then the 30 Years' War. We'll conclude our section on the European Reformation. Then the next section that we'll go to will deal with the rest of the spring, so May and the first 3 Tuesdays in June, though I might combine 2 of those. We're going to just look at the different denominations. A little bit of the pre-modern world, so we're moving now from this Middle Age, Reformation time into the modern world and the different denominations. I thought it would be helpful for you to just hear the kind of where the different denominations we're aware of today came from and what they believe and so on. So we'll do that. Okay, let me pray, and we will look at Reformation in the rest of Europe, part 24. Let's pray. Father, give us help now as we continue to see your work, your power through the gospel, through the preaching of your word in this world. And so, God, encourage us, convict us, help us to be more courageous, and help us to learn and see all the means that you use to establish your church. I ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. That's one of the things I want to say right off is as we go through these various different European countries, you're going to see how God uses things like political intrigue, warfare, just all kinds of things that these countries, which are solidly Roman Catholic, end up being Protestant, Lutheran, or Reformed. So let's start in Germany. As we're aware, in 1517, Luther posted the 95 Thesis, not intending to start anything other than a debate. And that led to Luther's condemnation by the Roman Catholic Church, his break from it, and the establishment of the Protestant Reformation in the early to mid 16th century. The Reformation then spread, as we know, was Zwingli in Switzerland, and then Calvin in Geneva. And so that was the hub of the Reformation. Scandal broke out in Germany. Philip of Hesse, a Reformation leader, his wife apparently was not a very decent woman, and he, for a period of 15 years, was involved in all kinds of sexual infidelities, culminating in him wanting to take a second wife. And some of the reformers that you're aware of okayed it. Bucer, Melanchthon, Luther even consented to it. And that was a scandal. That scandal kind of rocked Reformation Germany, further divided things, set back Protestantism. And at that time, the Roman Catholics, particularly in the south of Germany, were trying to take back these Protestant cities and areas that the reformers, the Lutherans, had won, not by war, but just by the preaching of the gospel. Luther died in the middle of all this in 1546 in February. The Catholics did reconquer some of the Protestant lands, but the people, their hearts were with the gospel. Their hearts were with the Reformation. And so in the warfare in Germany, lots of turmoil, murder, slaughter, and it ended up in a religious compromise in Germany. That was something of the first of the kind, although France would have it too, even more. It was called the Peace of Augsburg, which basically sort of gave legal status to both Lutheranism and Roman Catholicism in Germany, but it only in the sense that whoever was, let's say, prince over an area or the city council, they got to decide what their area, say their county in our day or their city, was either Lutheran or Roman Catholicism. Reformed faith was not allowed, neither were the radical reformers. So, that brought a certain kind of peace. Although if you were in a area controlled by a Roman Catholic prince and you were Lutheran, there's a lot of persecution and confiscation of lands and so on. But for 60 years, that held a certain kind of peace. And the idea was if you didn't like the area you lived in and weren't in line with it religiously, you could just move. But that was what was happening in Germany. Well, at the same time, let me say this, that kind of compromise was good in the short term, but explosive in the long term. Explosive in the sense that, if you, we'll talk about this in 2 weeks. It didn't really resolve the tensions long term, because in Lutheranism and Roman Catholicism, the state and the church were, so intertwined, it was going to explode in a war, which did, and we'll see that later in the 30 Years' War. But while that was going on, the rest of the continent is being Protestantized. I can skip that. Let's go to Denmark. So what I want to do is we'll start with the Scandinavian countries: Denmark, Sweden, Norway, Iceland, Finland. and talk about how those countries ended up accepting the Reformation faith, especially Lutheranism and some Reformed. All right, so the king in Denmark, King Christian II, uh, had been influenced by the humanism of Erasmus, and obviously being very close to Luther's Germany, introduced a Lutheranism and tried to introduce the Lutheran faith, the Protestant faith, but failed. He was he fled uh, and later sided with the Roman Catholics, first in the Netherlands, then to Norway, where he actually ended up arrested and died in prison. Well, his successor, the one that they replaced him with, it was his uncle Frederick, who, unlike Christian II, who introduced the Protestant faith for political purposes, it sounds like Frederick was an actual godly man, and he began to lead a genuine spiritual reformation. And there was somebody that was kind of like Luther's equivalent in Denmark. It was called the Danish Luther, Hans Tausen. And so through his preaching, his training of others, translation of the New Testament, the entire Bible into Danish, the country, the hearts of the people were won to the gospel. But as in we'll see in all these countries, as Protestant gains, this attracts the ire of the Roman Catholics, who begin military expeditions to oppose the growing Protestantism, which they do in Denmark. They crush Protestantism. It explodes in a civil war. But, and this is, one of the mysteries of God's providence, the king at the time, Christian III, was a Roman Catholic. But because of the Civil War, because of all of the turmoil, the country was about to go bankrupt. And so he saw that the only way to avoid bankruptcy was that the Roman Catholic Church, with all of their possessions, all of their lands, had great wealth. And so he saw the solution was to take it all. So he condemned Roman Catholicism, basically destroyed the Roman Catholic Church, took all Roman Catholic Church's possessions and lands, avoided bankruptcy for his nation. And the Danish people, because of the Roman Catholics bringing war to their country and civil war to their people, were good with this. They had been influenced by the Protestantism, and soon the Danish people, including the king, appealed to Germany for Luther's help, and Protestant pastors, Lutheran pastors were sent, which led basically to all of Denmark becoming Protestant. Again, this is all happening, Luther's thesis, 1570, this is all happening in the next, towards the end of the 16th into the 17th century. Rather a short time period. In Norway, the story was much simpler, really nothing spectacular. The Roman Catholic Church in Norway, into the Middle Ages, late Middle Ages, early Reformation period, was just dead. No spiritual vitality. It faded. The Reformation work wasn't real big, but basically the country just kind of turned apathetically towards Lutheranism. And so nothing special to report about Norway. And sorry for those of you of Norwegian descent. Iceland was a Roman Catholic nation, as all these were, but Iceland, this small island, was divided north and south, and each had its bishop ruling its part of the Roman Catholic country. In the southern area, Lutheranism took hold and grew, and like you'll see in these other countries, the New Testament would be translated into Icelandic, then the entire Bible. You had evangelical Protestant preaching. And so the South was soundly converted Protestant, and then has happened. The North, Roman Catholics, can't allow this, so they invade the South, military campaigns to recapture the southern lands for Roman Catholicism. It failed. And the result of its failure was that northern bishop was expelled and then murdered in exile. And Lutheranism then spread to the north and the rest of the country. And so again, here we have this wonderful providence of God in using these awful circumstances um, to bring about a wonderful work of God. Okay, Sweden was strongly linked, well, actually under Denmark, I should say. They were controlled, ruled by Denmark. And so the Reformation there in Sweden was linked with its struggle, the Swedes' struggle for independence from Denmark. The leader for independence, a man named Vasa, V-A-S-A, was Protestant, was elected king. Two very important Protestant evangelists had the backing of the king, and through their preaching, they wrote, there's translated the Bible, a catechism, a hymn book, won the majority of the Swedes to the Protestant faith, which resulted soon in Roman Catholicism being outlawed, and Lutheranism. Through some circumstances, there was a political marriage between a royalty from Sweden and one from Poland, which was still Roman Catholic, so that allowed some Roman Catholic influence into Sweden, and but that turned the people all the more towards the Protestant faith, which then soon became dominant. So really the whole of Sweden became one of the nations in the Scandinavian countries that was deeply, spiritually, solidly Protestant and Lutheran. Okay, the last Scandinavian country, Finland. Some of these other countries use political means, result in warfare. Finland wasn't like that. There's an influence there of humanism with Erasmus, and the leading reformer, Agricola, Agricola, Agricola. I'm looking up at my notes here and a few things in the book here, if you're wondering where I'm looking. Their work was really just to preach the gospel, translate the Bible into Finnish, and allow the faith to gradually win the hearts of the people. And so gradually over time, through their work, the handbook for worship, a prayer book, a liturgy, it just won the people. So the Finnish faith into a sturdy, strong Lutheranism. So if you're wondering if you're from the Scandinavian countries, if we have our Olsons and our Olsens and so on and so forth. That's how the countries where you have some heritage came to biblical faith in the gospel. Okay, let's move from the Scandinavian countries and go to France. We've heard a bit about France already, mainly in the connection with Calvin. Calvin was French. And Protestantism early on in the Reformation made major inroads into the country of France, such that, it looked like it would just become a Protestant nation somewhere along the lines of Germany or the Swiss city-states. But the king, Francis I, opposed it bitterly, and it led to severe persecution of the French Protestants. Now, Calvin would leave, go to Geneva. He, along with Zwingli and mentioned the other guys, they became the reformed wing of the Protestant Reformation. So the Protestants in France weren't Lutheran, but of the Reformed faith, and the French Reformed Church and Christians were called the Huguenots. We don't know what that name means. As far as I understand, it might be somewhat related to a German word that has to do with like being exiles, and so these Huguenots, these French Reformed Protestant Christians, were terribly persecuted. That's why Calvin and many of them left. Many of the French-speaking Protestant Christians would flee to other European nations and cities where the Reformation was accepted. And when they would go, let's say, to Geneva, some of them would be trained at the Genevan Pastoral Training College, and they'd be sent back to France, other countries too, but back to France to lead French-speaking Reformed churches. In fact, um, by this early Reformation period up till, let's say, 1560s, there's so many of them going back. By 1561, there's over 2,000 French-speaking Protestant Reformed churches. And so the thought was that even in light of the persecution, which was lessening, that the Protestant movement would capture France. In fact, at the end of the 1550s, 1559, there was openly held a assembly of all of the French-speaking Reformed Protestants in a national assembly in France. Unfortunately, it wouldn't just slowly conquer. The Roman Catholics would go to war over and touch off a horrific civil war that just about destroyed the entire nation. So in 1562, a Roman Catholic duke attacked a Huguenot church and murdered 63 of the Reformed Christians, and similar things would start happening regularly. Well, by this time, at least half of the French nobility, the class right under, that the king would come from, the high ruling wealthy class, half of them were Reformed Christians. And these Reformed nobles felt the obligation to protect their churches, their people, and their lands. And so they felt a duty to take up arms, create armies, take up arms, and defend. And so for the next 40 years, France would be embroiled in a religious civil war with the Roman Catholics attacking and the French-speaking Protestant Reformed defending. And so lots of atrocities, very awful. As I said, it almost destroyed France. Well, the Protestant chieftain, Admiral Coligny, Coligny, I don't know how you say it actually, desired to unite the country. And so he planned a marriage. We've talked about this before, but by way of reminder, he planned a marriage between one of the Protestant noble princes and one of the Roman Catholic noble princesses, hoping that that marriage would bring peace and religious toleration and end the Civil War. The Queen, Catherine, strongly Roman Catholic, opposing Protestants, persecuting, murdering, had hired assassins sometime before this to murder Coligny. 4 days before the wedding, he was shot. The Huguenots didn't respond with violence, but were gathering, and Catherine, as the wicked often do, panicked, thought that the Huguenot Christians under their under their nobility would renew their attacks and would touch off for the war. So she planned with the Roman Catholic nobility a general slaughter of Protestants nationwide. And that was carried out in one day on August 24th on the Roman Catholic Church calendar, St. Bartholomew's Day. And in one day they slaughtered men, women, and children, Huguenots, 20,000. That's on the low end of the estimation of how many were killed. So tens of thousands of Christians of the Reformation faith were massacred, and that's known in church history as the massacre of St. Bartholomew's Day. Well, the king at the time was succeeded by his brother, Henry III. Henry III had no children, and the heir to the throne, if something happened to Henry III, was a Reformation leader. That is one of the nobles on the Reformed side. And had happened that Henry III was assassinated, not by the Reformed, but actually by a Catholic fanatic, a Roman Catholic fanatic. And so his successor, um, to the throne, the next king, was a Reformed uh, Christian, and so the man on the throne, Henry IV, um, was allied with the Protestants, and he um, took power over the whole country, except, and so brought peace, except in one place, Paris. Um, he was able to bring peace after years of war, establish his power, except in Paris, and Paris still controlled, much. And so to win over Paris and the Roman Catholics there, he renounced, abandoned his Protestantism, and joined the Church of Rome, which obviously disappointed his Huguenot followers. Now, um, he was actually still loyal and protective of his Huguenot friends. And in April of 1598, so end of the 16th century, as I said, after 40 years of bloody, awful civil war, he enacted what this time secured the freedom of worship for the Huguenots, these French Protestant Christians. And it allowed for them to hold some fortified towns. It guaranteed their right to bring up their children in the Reformed faith. It allowed for all public positions to be held by Huguenot Christians. And so it was really, the one that we talked about in Germany wasn't like this. This actually granted nationwide, except in some places, um, complete freedom of faith, freedom to participate in the country, in politics, and have their own churches, freedom of worship, freedom to participate in buying and selling. And so basically it legalized both faiths, except in a few specific areas. And so this enabled the French Reformed Church to flourish. Um, and that would last for about 30 years, 3 decades, until the Roman Catholics began to be more aggressive and intolerant, and that would go away. So that's France. Let me end with the Dutch, the Netherlands. This is my heritage at this time. At the time of the Reformation, the Netherlands is surrounded on all sides by Protestant nations, Protestant rulers, Luther, and so on. But the Netherlands itself wasn't a free nation. It was a confederation, I guess, of 17 free provinces that were all under the Spanish king. But by the 1550s, so a couple decades in the Reformation, strongly influenced by the Reformed faith from Calvin's Geneva, um, many Reformed came to the Netherlands. Many Reformed pastors and evangelists came, and many Reformed churches were established. There are three very important Reformed creeds that were written. The first was actually written in Heidelberg, Germany, in the kind of the one. I don't know if you remember this. There's 7 electors in Germany. These 7 electors were kind of the highest political people in Germany, and they alone, these 7, had the authority to elect the Holy Roman Emperor. One of those electors became a Lutheran and then became Reformed because of the influence of Switzerland, especially in southern Germany. Though Lutheranism was dominant for the first bit of the Reformation, the Reformed faith grew greatly. And so one of those 7 electors responsible for electing the emperor turned to the Reformed faith, as did his city of Heidelberg. Heidelberg had a major European university. A debate was held there, and the Reformed faith won out. And so that university became a hub of Reformed learning, and they hired um, uh, Zachary Ursinus, I can't remember how to say his name, as the head of the college, and he, along with others, wrote what you may know of as the Heidelberg Catechism in 1563. Okay, so that became at the time the most important Reformed confession. In the Netherlands, as they went to the Reformed faith, the leader of the Reformed faith there, a man named Bres, B-R-E-S, or Breeze, wrote what is known as the Belgic Confession. If you remember, Calvin's Institutes were written to the King of France, or at least addressed to the King of France, to explain the Protestant Reformed faith. Bres did the same thing. He wrote the Belgic Confession to the King of Spain as a defense of the Reformed Protestant in the Netherlands. A third was written later on called the Canons of Dort. And those three, the Heidelberg Catechism, the Belgic Confession, the Canons of Dort, were called the three forms of unity that brought unity to the Reformed church, Reformed faith across the world. So, but the Netherlands is becoming Protestantized, and the Reformed faith, large churches, 15,000 members, 20,000 members, but again, the Roman Catholics, led by Spain, from Spain, began to persecute, and war and slaughter came. A man that you probably have heard, Prince William of Orange, embraced the Reformed faith in the 1570s, and he led campaigns, military campaigns, opposing the Roman Catholic oppression and tyranny to free the Netherlands from the tyrannical oppression of the Spanish. The north of the Netherlands was where they were working, and so all of the Protestant Reformed in the south went to the north to help fight. The north declared their independence, I think, in the 1570s, and they became they called themselves the United Provinces of the Dutch Republic. That's what is the Netherlands today, the Dutch today. The South remained under Belgian rule, and that's the nation of under Spanish rule. Excuse me. That's the nation we know of today as Belgium. Spain finally recognized this northern United Provinces of the Dutch Republic as independent in 1609. And so the Netherlands, the Dutch, became a hub, a main place of the Reformed faith, along with Switzerland and France and many places in Germany like Heidelberg. Okay, so that's how the story of the Reformation spread from the beginnings in 1517, and now we're up to the early 17th century, all manner of ways and means that God used to bring the gospel to these nations and peoples, which many of us are descended from. Okay, so hopefully that was helpful. Next week, we'll look specifically at England and Scotland, and which also has great influence then on America. And so after we do England and Scotland, as I said, we'll look at the Catholic Counter-Reformation, the Council of Trent, and then at the 30 Years' War. It may be that I can combine those two, we'll see. And then from there, we'll look at the various denominations. And then next fall, we'll pick it up again on Christianity in America. Okay, hope that was helpful, enjoyable. Let me know if I can assist in any other way, though, as I said, I'm nowhere of an expert on these. I'm basically, regurgitating things as I learn. So hopefully it's helpful to you. All right, God bless. Have a good rest of your day and week. Bye.